It is absolutely fantastic to have Frances Valintine with us for a seat at the table. Frances is a founder, a CEO at the Mind Lab and Tech Future Labs, author of Future You, which I have a copy of. I don't know that you've signed it for me yet, but anyway, a futurist, a technologist, a director, and an educator. So welcome, Frances.
So good to be here. And it literally is a seat at the table.
A seat at the table.
Not a virtual table, a real table. I'm very excited about that.
It really is. It really is. So we're going to start off with some quick fire questions, just to get things rolling and moving.
Marmite. Everyone start with that question.
Marmite, I love it. Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Not me.
Fair enough. Neither. Vegemite all the way.
I can remember my first Marmite and Vegemite experience, and it was not a good one.
Coming from the American.
Yeah, coming from, yeah, exactly.
Ideal holiday.
Very much adventure, off the beaten track, as rugged as they get.
Wow, I didn't expect that.
Yeah.
New Zealand, abroad?
No, abroad. Abroad, backpack, into villages. Yeah.
Fab.
On my own, solo, every year. Do it.
Wow.
Favourite?
Honestly can't tell you a favourite. I've just come back from Morocco. The last one was Oman. Before that was places like Yap or Borneo, Costa Rica. Like, just give me a place where I can get off the beaten track.
Far out, that is awesome. Thank you. Party with 100 or 5 people?
5.
When are you most relaxed?
Probably first thing in the morning, before everything starts. I'm a really morning person, and I love that calm and morning light, and that's when I sort of sit and just take in the morning before I get going.
Sunrise, not sunset.
Definitely a sunrise.
I've turned into a sunrise. What are you curious about right now?
I think there's very little I'm not curious about, to be fair. That's sort of what drives me, is actually why, how, when, who. So whenever I come across anything that feels unfamiliar but also interests me, I'm kind of a deep diver very quickly. So I think as a researcher, you typically have that curiosity about why.
Nice. And what does a day in the life of Frances look like?
I think all busy people will say the same thing. There's no typical day. It really is mixing it up, and that's how I like it. They're long days. They're never a sort of a short punctuation and get home. They kind of extend. But I really do like mixing between having time for time to research, time to think, time to strategize. I love teaching. I still teach on postgraduate programs. I love working with clients. Students are still one of my biggest inspirations, particularly mature students. And then I think on top of that is just time to reflect on the day, what's happening in the world, looking at the news, thinking about what's going to happen around the events that are, rolling out in front of our eyes.
It's definitely an interesting place at the moment, isn't it? And if you could invite one person to dinner tonight, who would it be and why?
I think anyone who was an adventurer in the early days, so someone like Jane Goodall, who started before anybody else even realised we had to think about conservation and sustainability. Anyone who starts early, way before the wave of, sort of identifying something's coming downstream. And so, you could put people like Sir Richard Attenborough in the same category. People who think about the planet first, think about the long-term consequences, intergenerational. Those people, I think, have got to imagine the stories they tell and the people they've met. I just feel like there's a lot to be said for people who've been on this planet for a long time.
I love it.
Thank you.
Brilliant.
Excited for what's not quick fire. Yeah. So we'll just start. We don't necessarily we'll go through all of these because we do tend to kind of then go off when, depending on what you say. But let's start with maybe an obvious question around what is your purpose and your why in terms of your life, and what led you to that purpose?
I think if you'd asked my teenage self what was my purpose, I think I would have said my purpose is to make things beautiful. I was very focused on aesthetics of places, and I love environments, I love interiors, I love gardens. I love fashion. I love things that make people feel good. But actually, it wasn't long after that I probably realised that was a real passion and continues to be a passion, but it wasn't something I wanted to make work. I didn't want it to become my mission around what drove me every day, because it was something I enjoyed so much. And so I did realise that actually when I stumbled into education, which is now 25 years ago, what was interesting is I had never thought about education at all as anything to do with my future. I mean, I left school at 17 and went to London. I certainly hadn't gone into the education system. I'd been to multiple high schools. And yet I suddenly realised that with one single conversation with a person, you can literally change someone's life or their outlook. And it can be just a bit of information that they've never heard before that changes perception. And so for me, that's so important, that the more information we have, the better decisions we make. And I think, I don't think there's anything else in my life that gives me that same level of just absolute joy of watching the penny drop for someone and go, I could change things. And that's just so empowering.
And it's interesting, because I think if obviously that's around the impact that you can have and understanding that. Hard to measure sometimes, but so
sometimes
clear.
It's profound, and I'm sure you've even seen it in these podcasts, where a conversation leads someone down a path they haven't thought about before, and suddenly it just explodes in their mind. And I think about those times if you've got children listening to this, sometimes sitting in the car next to your child, it doesn't matter if they're 5 or 25, having those conversations that are really candid conversations, sometimes you can almost hear the cogs suddenly grind to a flipped moment and go, oh, actually that makes me think very differently. And the reason I say side by side is because if you're talking to your children, you're facing them directly, they're not going to listen to any of it. So it's kind of a side by side conversation. And I think in the learning environment where someone's open to learning, you kind of do have a side by side conversation with them. They're there and willing and open to learn, but they're not sure what they're going to get. And so they're not coming in feeling apprehension about what this conversation is going to lead to. It's sort of like, what will we discover in this exchange of ideas and thoughts? And I think a lot of people don't really spend enough time thinking about intimate conversations. Hence, why do I like 5 people in a dinner party and not 100 people? I think intimate conversations are one of the most underrated experiences of our lives. You can sit with a few people and have the best experience, and you can sit with many and have really almost just a fleeting memory. And so for me, it's about really having those hard conversations which open parts of the brain and the mind and the heart and make you think, well, actually, I've never thought about that before.
Have you always been the person that thinks so far ahead, or far ahead than anybody else around you? Because you're always the sort of the trailblazer in thinking and forward thinking. Has that always been the case?
I don't know that I recognised that was different than anyone else when I was younger. And a lot of people ask, and certainly once I wrote the book and released it this year, a lot of people said, what made you at 17 get on a one-way ticket to London not knowing anyone? And it was this really strong idea that there was a big world out there, that there was something that if I stayed where I was not going to be able to discover it. And this huge kind of pool of not looking for excitement, not looking for the big lights, not looking for the big party, just this idea there's a lot of stuff out there. And I think if at 14 a chance to go into the space industry, I would have done that, because it would have been like the ultimate to the next frontier. But it wasn't an option back then, and probably won't be while I'm on this planet. But this idea of thinking further ahead and actually seeing what happens with the intercept between what's going on, the data points you can see and the signals of change and the trends and the behaviours and the demographics, all of those things have been really fascinating for me. And yet I've never studied them. It's just been this innate kind of curiosity that says, I wonder what happens next. It's like the chapter books where you want to read the last chapter first to see where it goes. Don't do that anymore, to be honest. But as a child,
I used to do that too.
Oh yeah,
Sometimes I'll read the last page and decide whether I'm going to read the whole thing.
Yeah, well, I have to say, I'm the most infuriating person to watch movies with, because I literally do the whole plot in my mind, and I'll say, oh, this is what's going to happen next, and this is what, and invariably it does, because there's a kind of a sort of a pattern and a cadence that goes with movies.
Yeah.
But people get really frustrated. I'm like, okay, I need to say nothing at all. But I sort of take that. Where does this all go to?
Interesting.
Got the crystal ball.
Yeah, I wish.
Yeah, don't we all? Well, maybe not sometimes, but
maybe not.
So how about a mountaintop, moment and a deep valley moment? Have you been through those in your business journey? Any ones that stick out?
In my business journey, look,
it doesn't have to be business journey. It could be just your life journey.
Well, I think a business is an easier one where I think the very first time I created my own business, and I'd just this idea that suddenly I didn't have to be someone's employee. So I think from the very first one was the idea that my path may not be like everyone else. It was a tiny little marketing business. It was really nothing, and it lasted for 5 seconds. But there was this moment where I was like, okay, even though all the people around me feel like they've got a career, and whether it's a tradie or a lawyer or an accountant, whatever it might be, they felt like they had this clear trajectory where they're going. I didn't ever have that. And so I had this moment where I was going, what do I do? Like, what is this world about? And so this idea that I could just create something was a pretty profound moment. My first business card, it was like, woohoo, this is my business card, and it's got my name and I designed it. So that was probably the beginning. I had so many amazing experiences through my business world. And look, the deep valleys, whenever you're close with people in work, you always find the situation where those connections stop. Relationships with friends continue forever, pretty much, even if you don't see them for years. Relationships in your family, obviously, all going to plan, those are lifelong. But actually, I always find it really hard when you spend, months, years, long periods of time with people who you greatly admire, and then they leave, and they leave to another business, and quite often you don't ever see them again. I sort of feel like that relationship to me is one of the hardest things. There's sometimes people who I've grown so close to, who I lean on, immensely, and suddenly they're just not there. And it's almost like they've died. They've almost felt like they're out of your life. And I think we don't talk about that very often, that we think about what it means where people in your work life leave. And when you're a person who's an entrepreneur and a founder, those relationships are definitely closer, because they're giving it all the time, because they've made big sacrifices to be and follow what you're imagining. And so, the first time someone left my employment, I remember being deeply distressed about this idea that what have I done wrong? Not really understanding, of course, everybody eventually wants the next opportunity. And so,
how did you get to that point?
Because I found myself in a funk. I was like, what's going? This is, and I couldn't. I wanted to be excited for them, and I wanted to think this is a really great for them. It's going to be amazing, and I can bring in new blood, and it's going to be amazing. But actually, I found myself in a really unusual situation where I just didn't feel excited about getting up in the morning, and I'm an optimist almost all the time. So it was really reflecting that, saying, what is it what's going on? And in the same way, if you have a tiff with your loved one or your family member, you sort of have that moment of feeling just that unease about things until it gets fixed, and you want to go in and build that relationship back again. But when someone just leaves, if it was a relationship, you'd be like having big heart-to-hearts about what's going on.
Right.
But you don't. You just say, okay, fantastic, let's go to the next career, and you follow them on LinkedIn.
I've never thought of it like that. It's so true.
Yeah.
You do have such a deep connection with your team members, and when they do leave, it's like, bye. See you on LinkedIn.
Yeah. Share a chocolate cake or a brewski, and it's all over. And
because you're having to let go.
Yeah.
And it's the only part of life that's like that. So that sort of feels like every time that happens, and it doesn't matter. I now 125 people, and I had someone leaving this morning, and I was like, please this be the last person leaving this year, and they're going into a research job, and they've got an amazing PhD and some weird technology, and I want that so badly for them, but I still have that sense of, I just want to keep you. You're so, you're such a good person, and you've done so many good things, and And I also sometimes want them to be involved with the future success because they've been the ones to pave the success for the future. And it's almost like, but you need to come and see what happens next, like at the end of the book.
That's awesome. So you have such a strong belief in the power of technology, and what sparked that interest, and how do you stay on the pulse of what's going on around the rising technology and innovation space, because you are so on the pulse?
Look, it's interesting you said the word pulse, because I was thinking, as you said, the technology that made me first interested was actually an electric fence, which is so weird. Because I grew up on a farm and an electric fence stopped a stock going from one area to another.
Yeah.
And the most simplest, there's one wire with a current through it, and it enabled total control of a large number of stock. And we had bulls and cows, and the logic was they could charge for it any time they didn't. It had enough of a purpose that it kept them contained. And strangely enough, as a young person, I was really lucky. I was a real tinkerer, and my dad was too, so I could hang out the shed and tinker as much as I liked. But he was really on the kind of the engineering tinkering, and I was more on the kind of like, can we put some electricity through it, kind of, some sort of more of the technical side. And, I have all the same sort of stories where a lot of people got into technology early, having early computers and computer games and getting into it. But I've always seen where technology, the simplest technology can change things so rapidly. So go back to electric fence, it changed the life of someone who had to herd, with a stick and a dog, and herd sheep and shepherds, and the whole, and suddenly it was like, we can have these, farms that control everything. And of course now they automate everything, and it's all changed again. But I think why I love technology so much is a good piece of technology makes everything easier. And so when people are sort of reluctant or thinking technology has some form of control, it's sort of like, actually the only control it really gives is your freedom. It gives you the chance to control your day a little more because things are being done. And every technology comes with teething problems and things. And in fact, I've just put a robo mower into my property to mow the lawns. And, only a week ago, and I can't tell you how many times I've gone to the app and going, you stupid mower. It's like, you're stuck again. And like, what is this? It's a piece of crap. But, at the end of the day, it's mowing my lawns, and I'm really happy about that. But it is about thinking about how do you gain back time, because we've traded so much of our life for things that we really shouldn't have to do. And, for me, it comes back to people. If the ultimate enjoyment in life is to be with people you love and care about or who inspire you, then sitting out or walking around mowing lawns, while it's enjoyable, if you're doing it at this time of year twice a week, it becomes less enjoyable. So how do we bring that into business? How do we bring that into the everyday lives of somebody, regardless of whether they're an import or export, or they are a manufacturer, or they're a personal trainer? How do we use that technology so they can get better insights, better data, more free time, know what works and what doesn't work? I grew up in early days around marketing, and that classic line about, half of marketing works, we just don't know which half. The idea now that anybody would do marketing and not know what works and what doesn't work. So you don't spend all that money just trying to decipher which of those two scenarios is actually working. And so it is, I just feel like people often see things that are new and assume in some way that it's going to be bad. The amount of people who think automation is going to take away all the jobs in the world. Well, we have a global talent shortage, and actually, I think officially today's the 15th of November. Is that right?
It is, yes.
Today the world hits 8 billion people. So it is actually today that the world hits 8 billion. So I've been tracking it, so you can literally go and do the world tracker, and it will hit today is 15th of November. And so that in itself, we've got this massive, connected, huge population, more educated, young, dynamic, digital, and still we suffer because we don't have enough people who do jobs. So automation is only helping us. It's not a hindrance at all.
Well, it's a great lead into the next question, and I've watched the faces at conference when you've spoken 2 years in a row. Some of the people in the front row whose faces clearly are just... So, what advice do you have for people where technology and innovation actually scares them? Or where their reaction sometimes is, I'd rather just pretend this is going to put my head in the sand for a little while longer and it'll become someone else's problem, not mine. Yeah,
it is a really interesting, because actually depending on their age, and so if you take someone like me, so Generation X, we've seen the biggest technological change. I was fully analog as a child and fully digital as an adult. And so I think this generation, in a way, is very much still involved with business. They're still in leadership roles, they're still making decisions, they're on boards. But they, unless they've been on that journey over the last 20 years, if they've sort of relied on other people to do that technology stuff, the IT thing, then the gap is enormous. And so I think when you look at that group, often it's the fear of not looking like they know what they're doing, because they're in positions where they're supposed to be the decision maker, the leader, the decisive one, and suddenly they've been asking questions about, you know, which stack they're going to use, and should they move to Agile, and, you know, and which software application, and should we use, you know, Slack, or should we be using, what is it Monday.com or something else, and, you know. And you know, you can find that on Confluence. Like, they start hearing these things and they're just like, what is this language? And because they can't chip in, they can't be an expert, they can't, it becomes overwhelming. It becomes this, I'm just going to literally just step back into the shadows and pretend it's just not happening. I do think there's an element, particularly with small business owners, where they try to be everything. They want to be, well, a necessity to be, you know, often they are literally making every decision all day on every level. And the idea of outsourcing or actually stepping into learning to understand is another time commitment. It's another thing they have to do. And it's also not part of their general character. Like, a lot of small business owners want to run a business. They don't want to run an empire. They don't want to grow a huge multinational. They want a business that supports them to have a good lifestyle. But all these things that are changing represent a not so good lifestyle, because it means they're going to have to step into some very unknown territory, or outsource it at cost to someone else who's going to then make decisions on their behalf. And that's a tricky one.
And is that a Kiwi mindset, do you think?
Yeah.
How do we change that? How do we evolve that?
Look, I think one of the most challenging demographics, and if you look across small advanced economies of similar scales, so places like Finland and well, actually Finland, Singapore, or Israel, or, you know, bigger countries, but Norway is another good example. They don't have this huge reliance on government in the same way. They have a lot of capital coming in from other markets. They, you know, are very high in innovation levels, and so you see this amount of money coming in, so they actually manage to create large entities, highly technical entities, which then feed competition in the market. And so in New Zealand, our biggest employer is the government, which is, you know, it's unusual in a country that actually has such a high percentage of people who work for the government. And our second biggest is people who work for themselves. So when you think about what drives people to learn and to adapt and to adopt, is competition. Like, you know,
I don't have
you know, Bob the butcher down the road now has got some new app that I can order your Christmas ham, you know, online and do that. Well, I better do something similar. But actually, if no one's doing that, then it's quite easy just to say, well, no one's doing that. You know, we don't need to change. And so there are people who literally do the same thing year on, year out. The Yellow Pages, the fact they still exist, says to me nothing bad about the Yellow Pages, but the very fact that people believe that, or refer to the Yellow Pages as though that they're the holy grail of how to find someone in the world of Google, just goes to show we're running a two-tier. I always call it the samurai ninja world. You know, the samurais, the traditional, you know, keep everything kind of culturally sound and don't break the traditions. And there's the ninjas who are coming in and just woo, woo, you know, and off they go, and they're just kind of running up walls. Yeah. And actually, so you know, it all feels like it's all kind of like, what's going on?
Yeah.
How do we get more ninjas?
Yeah, I think this next generation are all ninjas. I'm pretty sure of it. Particularly, you know, I think there's something about 12-year-old kids that, you know, that if I look at them, one, so smart, like they know things that I never knew. Even now, they still throw me. And then I think they've also just see technology as a tool. It's just, you know, it's the same as using a toothbrush. It's just something else, and they just get behind it and go, well, how does that work? And work it out. Build creators, all that, innovators. So I think that, you know, there's a generation that is really going to come and say, actually, we don't want it that way. And we're seeing it in so many places around the world where there's big, you know, significant young populations, like in Africa, where they're just dominating innovation rankings because the population is so young, you know, predominantly under 20, technology's at their fingertips. So we're kind of the other extreme, you know, we're aging and we've got a lot more people in retirement than we've ever had before, a lot more people staying in business longer, holding on to the business, and And actually, it probably will be a little bit of an element of over time. The good thing is, I think we also have people who are in that older generation who actually are like, I've got nothing to lose. Give it all to me. And certainly, like even at work, we have scholarships for over 60s, and they are heavily contested. And a lot of people are like, bring it on. I want to be, for the next 20 years as articulate in technology as I possibly can be. So it's not necessarily an age thing, but I think it is definitely a sort of a hierarchical thing where people, the more senior you become, the less willing you are to be wrong. And I think that's pretty tough. Yeah.
And I do think that curiosity, you've mentioned it a couple of times, but I just think if we can figure out how to dial that up a bit, it'll make a difference, which is what happens when you spend time talking to 12-year-olds or not.
Or 92-year-olds, when you actually just start hearing things from a different perspective.
Yeah.
And I think that curiosity is a great one because, that sort of the rabbit holes you can go down on the internet. Now, if you go to the right ones, of course, you can discover all sorts of things. If you go to the wrong ones, then you'll discover all sorts of things. And then validating what of this is actually real and what's not, and other things. But I think in general, curiosity is what drives people's ability to kind of innovate because they want to do it slightly better or in a slightly different way. And so
great.
And how do we attract those curious people back into New Zealand or not let them go? Because it's a big problem.
We have a major problem with and we are so reliant on immigrant talent. If you look at all the data by comparison to almost any other country in the world, our immigrants are more qualified, significantly more qualified than the typical Kiwi. And secondly, they bring just huge amounts of experience, including technology and large corporate kind of builds and doing things at scale. And so those people, unfortunately, in a world of post-COVID, can live anywhere. And they can work virtually, they can work for anyone. So it's going to take a massive shift in kind of policy, I think, to attract them and make them much more flexible and sort of the nomad type of workers. And I see some countries are really leaning into that you can actually get these sort of 3-year nomad visas, which means as long as you're not working in the local economy, that you're not taking money out, you can live there and work for anyone in the world, and they get the benefits of having the money spent in the country and actually bringing the economies back up in places like, for example, in Bali or in Costa Rica, where they're really kind of saying, how do we get these sort of nomadic technology workers to work? So I think we're going to have to think really cleverly. I mean, one of the things I think is we should just match our immigration policy to the Australian policy. If you get a visa for Australia, it's totally interchangeable with New Zealand, and then we'll at least be on a kind of an even playing field.
Why has that not happened?
I think we all sit there. Every single business leader I know is saying the same thing. It's like, why is this so hard when we are all just bleeding and trying to find great talent? Yeah. So the mystery.
We all need to go arm in arm down to the change.
So what does a seat at the table mean to you, Frances? I mean, how does it affect the way you lead, run businesses, sit on boards? What does it mean to you?
Yeah, I think more around the seat at the table is who is at the table. Actually, there's been so many isms that I've sort of processed through my life, and most of those have been addressed in different ways, and I think equity and equality in many cases has been really positively enforced in many cases. However, there are still big gaps when it comes to youth. I think the world we're creating is not for us, and actually we still don't understand the voice of young people, and we still have a huge amount of gaps in terms of ethnicity. And if we look forward, and just as our country, we just take Aotearoa and saying, what does it look like? It's only a matter of 18 years before European or Pakeha New Zealand becomes a minority. And so we have to start understanding that decisions we make, it's not about what does it look like for mainstream New Zealand to look like us. It's actually about providing the services and the products for a totally different type of younger, more Māori Pacific and Asian populations, for a huge number of retired people, and what services and products do they want. So I think it's really comfortable right now because we have just enough people in that sort of dispendable income and the kind of who look like us and feel like they sit somewhere between 30 and 60, that we're all pretty relaxed about what else is out there. And that will be the blind spot for so many businesses, about if they don't have people at the table who are telling them right now that there are things that just don't work for them, that they actually are not suitable, not appropriate, not accessible, with all sorts of weird biases built into things that we design and create, with not necessarily any deliberate avoidance of trying to address access and things that are really important, but just massive blind spots. And to me, those blind spots can easily be championed by having authentically engaging with groups that we need to see their perspective on the world. It doesn't have to be formal. It can just be making sure that they are brought to the table, that their voice is not a tokenism, it's not about a quota, it's about, I truly and really deeply want to understand the things that don't work for you about my business or my product or my service. But also, what do you imagine that same service would look like in 20 years or even 10 years? And if you went to a bank, for example, and talked to a bunch of 12-year-olds or 20-year-olds about what their future banking needs might be, you can imagine what they'll be talking about. They certainly won't be talking about, a house, a car, and a job for life. The idea of having a bank manager and building that, in a world where digital currencies and people are dealing in crypto and doing all sorts of other things, and the great unbanked in many countries, and you've got people who are thinking much more about collectives and distributed autonomous organisations and, the power of mum and dad to bank and mum and dad and a whole lot of stuff. We need to make sure those people have been heard. But we also need those people who are not accessing banking. Why do we have such a low home ownership for Māori Pacifica? How much of that is because the banks just don't see that the way they work and collectively pull money and the whānau support to buy a house as a collective, you can't do that through a bank like that. So I think it's those sorts of things where the bank is just one example I could use of many where those, again, blind spots and the lack of curiosity to say, well, are we really doing the best for everyone or just for some?
And what can businesses do? What are the small steps that businesses can do to make that change?
I think the first thing is not to be influenced by people who sit at lots of other tables.
Love that.
I might just leave it there.
I love that. That's powerful.
Perfect. That's one of those moments you were describing before, where you say something and something just drops. What do people misunderstand about you the most?
Look, I think there's so many things. For years, with a name like Frances, which is a male and female name, in the early years of my career, when I was around technology, every time I went anywhere, whether I went to speak or checked into a hotel or booked a ticket, I was always Mr. Frances. And so I had this thing, and then when you turn up, it's like, oh, so I think across my life, for probably 30 years, I've had, and it's still quite funny. And in fact, there's even a funnier one now because Kate Spade, the handbag shoe designer, she, unfortunately, before she passed away, she had a business partner and they had a massive fallout. Like, it just was sort of like an epic fallout. And through that process, she said, well, that's it, I'm going to change my brand. So not long before she died, she changed her name to Frances Valentine. Yeah, so there's actually now, Frances Valentine is actually a shoe and handbag design chain. So yeah, who knew, right? So wherever I go places, I can actually see, go in and see, Frances Valentine shoes. Well, it's happened a few times in international talks where people have actually introduced me as a designer. Where they haven't been briefed properly, they've done a Google search and gone,
What are the chances?
However, it's no kidding. Even this morning, I got sent a bill via Google Docs for cleaning a store for Frances Valentine in the UK through a Google Doc because someone just found the nearest name, Frances Valentine, on at a Gmail account.
Bizarre.
So I've still had this really weird. So I feel like I've got this weird alter ego out there. Although she has Valentine spelled the correct way, not with the I but the E. So there is a spelling difference. So there is that. But I think on some of the things I shared in my book I think people really sort of were quite surprised by it. I've had many weird situations around people I've lost. People near misses for me. I've had certainly some very strange near misses. One of the first ones I talk about in the book is I've been in a car, not in a car crash, but a plane crash. But also things where a disproportionate number of my female friends through my life have been murdered, and a disproportionate number. And I don't know
my
why.
jaw is
I can't explain. Murdered. Yeah, so it's one of those things, and actually the publisher and I had quite a kind of back and forth about how is it possible, and actually having to validate from the time from people I went to school with all the way through, and including one last year. So it's just been a series from my life. Now I always think, is it because I know a lot of people, or is it because I connect deeply with people and I but it's always had this under kind of current for me of saying, why?
Yeah.
Not so much why I know them, but why do so many women get murdered?
Yeah.
And even across the world. So, and actually at the hands of people they normally know.
I was going to say, is there a common thread?
Yes, the common thread is almost all have been through people they know. And when it's a thing you don't know about me, it's because it's something that sits so heavy with me. And I talk about it again in my book. A book that was not really designed to talk about things like death, but I had to bring it in because I ended up in basically a defence course, like a physical defence course with a whole bunch of women doing hardcore combat training about 2 years ago, maybe even less than 2 years ago, all of who were trying to figure out ways to protect themselves from assailants. And we were literally throwing each other around and slamming each other up against concrete walls in a car park training environment. And I was thinking, and everybody there I talked to had an incident where they'd been accosted and they'd had to fight for their lives. And I was like, this doesn't make sense. That we live in a civilized world, we live in an egalitarian society, and yet there's this undercurrent that we just don't address, a bit like teen suicide. There is a dark side to our country, and I think we have a lot of learning and a lot of growing up to do when we truly say that we are this great country with all the opportunity, because I think we still have to address there are things that are going on which are pretty sobering. Yeah. I didn't mean to bring the tone down.
No, that's one of the questions we ask is, when the going gets hard, how do you keep going? Well, that's a nice, so what keeps you motivated and mentally sound when you've experienced
how do you
some
carry
of that?
I mean, that's...
Yeah, look, I think the only way I can answer that is I still believe in people, and I believe that positivity, and 99.9% of people are good, genuine people who just want to do the right thing, and who have good days and bad days, and they have their own dramas and their own things that go on in their lives. But I think what happens is we just need to focus sometimes on having that she'll be right attitude. And so I'm guilty of she'll be right. Actually, this is a really bad day. I want to put a big X mark through today and write it off completely. Tomorrow's going to be good. And I think that's part of this mental health challenges that people have. It's like, what if it's not good? Or what if the environment you're at home that you don't see people having is not good? Or what if they're dealing with a child who's not in a good space? So I think getting up the next day is actually really important, because otherwise you would never do anything. And so for me, it is about focusing on all the people I know who are doing amazing things every day. And if they're getting out of bed every day and kind of doing the grind and the hard mahi and actually going and driving it forward, then gosh, I got no reason not to. I've got all the reasons in the world to do it. But I do carry a heavy heart on a lot of things about things that just don't feel just in this world, and I say that from the ultimate position of privilege. So it's another thing that I have to be really mindful of is I have a wonderful home life, and I have a network of incredible people. So it's sometimes you look at life and just think how unfair and unjust it can be.
Wow.
As an employer of a team of people, having that sort of weight of responsibility for your team, how do you carry that? Because it's becoming blurred now, and to the point where as a leader, it's so important to be empathetic and be hearing and listening into what might be going on at home, but at the same time, it weighs heavily on a business owner's shoulders. How do you let it blur, or do you keep compartmentalise?
I think I've adjusted the way I think about that blurring over the years. I think today it's fair to say it's very blurred. And I can't compartmentalise, and my staff, I sort of, what I've recognised probably in the last 5 years is I attract people who are on a mission. I attract people who've got the same kind of impact desire as I do. And interesting enough, when we hire someone who doesn't, we call them the Teflon kids. They literally last a week and they're like, oh, it's all kumbaya in this environment. Like, I'm out of here. Like, whoa.
Didn't know I was joining a cult.
Literally, it feels like it's almost like walk in the door and bounce out, because it's like, whoa.
Yeah.
So those people who perhaps have really enjoyed being sort of the gossip in their previous company or something, or the one that sort of stirs the pot, they sort of come in and go, gosh, no one's gossiping in here. Everyone's kind of on a mission and know how to have fun, but also have this. They're there for a reason.
Yeah.
And I think that's been the ability to pick those people has been probably my greatest strength. Is knowing that the people who are really committed to doing good things come in all different shapes and sizes and ethnicities and all sorts of. There's a really big melting pot of people, and some of them you'd say their title and their name, you'd go, that doesn't even make sense. So because that under a traditional model that wouldn't make sense, because you're too young, or you're the wrong kind of gender, or you're so really looking at the individual as part of it, but then also accepting that with that, those people are really good at being kind of quite open and candid about things. They typically are reflective types of characters. They don't have the ego of, I want to keep everything kind of sort of zipped in and not let people know who I am. So it comes with a spilling out from individuals, and I think that spilling builds trust. And so it's not an empathy so much as just a high trust environment.
Love that.
And then I think, I am certainly the one who will sign off emails to staff with love you and kisses sometimes, and I'm like, gosh, if somebody reads this, I'm sure the auditors must have a field day when they see this, going, who is this woman? And it's sort of like, we do things which are much more like a family, but not because it's a conscious doing it like a family, but just because it feels like the right thing to do.
And it comes naturally.
Yeah, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's like it's all really tough and it's a hard grind, and it comes back to when people leave and then you get all thrown off course, and so it's not always like that. But I think what carries it again is like a family. Then just down the road things will normalise again, and actually we're back on the mission, and a couple of people have either left or something has happened, and a couple of years ago in January we lost a staff member, and it threw us, like we would just come back into work after summer break, and she passed away, and it took weeks and weeks for everyone to recover. And even today, you say her name and everybody sort of tears up a little bit, and that comes with this immense responsibility when you've got people more than just employees. And I know their family, and on Sunday we all, a whole bunch of us with their kids went off and saw a matinee theatre show together, and we do these things which are almost like a cult.
Exactly.
No. Really good one.
We don't have matching t-shirts.
and there isn't a secret handshake.
No, there's definitely not a secret handshake. Secret words, but no.
So you must have incredible pride in terms of what you've created at Mind Lab and Tech Futures Lab. Tell us a little bit about your biggest learnings, and that may include some of the biggest challenges.
Look, I'm never comfortable with recognition, which is really weird, because I know I've been very lucky to receive a lot of it, because it is one of those things that's so accidental. What you do, and if you do it well and then others like what you do, actually I think sometimes you get too much recognition because actually people are just doing what they want. And one of the frustrations I have is I look back to my mother's generation and think, gosh, no woman of her generation received any recognition. And when I started the Mind Lab, I got so much, and it was almost like, why? Just can you focus the lens on someone else for a little while? Because I think I've had plenty of this. And it sounds ungrateful, but I think if you went into the health sector or, across the education sector or into many social services or people who just do the really hard graft, get nothing at all. And so success is a really weird thing for me because I do what I do because I love it, and it does every day make me go, what can I do better than I'm doing today, and how can I give more security to people into the future? How can I make sure that my students are learning stuff that's really relevant and useful for their lives, so they're not wasting a minute of their time committing to things that don't bring value. So I think, but part of that is also driven by the people I work with who are saying, how can we do it better? And that's not good enough, and let's try that harder, do that better again. And having people who can tell me that's also really useful. Like, actually, we can do better than this. Like, let's make this better. Or addressing things when they're not great immediately. When you know something's not working, or it's not working for one person, find out why.
Yeah.
Just being really honest about not being fearful of feedback and fearful of criticism, because I think, again, you can never be everything to everyone. So if you find out through discovery and curiosity there's a few people it's just not working for, whether it be the work environment or whether it be the people I'm teaching or the advice I'm giving, if it's not working, that's really important to figure out why not and what can you do about it. Is it something you can do? And if you can, using every possible skill you have to fix it, if you can.
So I thought I might skip this, but I want to go back to it because I guess I'm really curious to understand what success looks like for you when it comes to the education sector. So we talked about immigrants coming in to fill the gaps, but how do we grow more of the people we need here? And, if you could redesign the education model, what would it look like?
Wow, that's a big question.
I know.
It's a very important question, though.
Yeah, and look, I have so many thoughts and so much time in my brain is dedicated to this. So if I look at my own institutes, what's interesting is 2/3 are female. So average age 44, 2/3 female. But what's interesting about that is that's totally normal. So 2/3 of all tertiary students globally are now women.
I did not know that.
So we are kicking ass everywhere. So universities across the world are being dominated by females, right from undergrad to PhDs. So when I first started, 9 years ago in this particular part of my career, I was like, woohoo, look at me, female empowerment, and then I realised it was completely normal. But I think that is one of the wonderful things that's changed in education is far more women recognise that there isn't a glass ceiling, that we can just keep learning and keep applying for bigger jobs if we want them. We can keep doing bigger things if we wish to. And so even that little part of that, of having the chance to support women to keep going beyond perhaps where they thought their career would stop, that's really empowering to me. The other thing about the dynamics or the demographics of my students is a disproportionate number of them were born offshore. Again, you could say, well, we live in Tamaki Makaurau, which is really typical that we have such a high immigrant community. But I think, again, it's this culture of learning which is much more prevalent in other cultures than it is here. And one of the challenges I have, and one of the things when success would really kind of come to its own for me, is when I see more Kiwi males learning. It is really interesting right across the whole ecosystem. The number of men, say over the age of 30, who are formally learning is very low. And that will become a major blind spot for our economy, because if they are making decisions and they are basically preloading on the stuff they learnt at university, whatever, years ago, and making decisions based upon what worked before, we potentially will sort of really hinder our ability to innovate and grow. Large organisations have big impact, and we won't create, the next Zero or the next Rocket Lab or the companies that have sort of put us on the map. And if we look at our innovation rankings, we actually had, in fact, someone said to me recently, there are more Peters in New Zealand who have become great successes than there are females. Our history is there's been innovation was sort of like a 20-year ago and before, and it was very driven by engineering and very driven by science. And if you come now in the last 20 years, we really start looking much, much lighter. Like there is so few true big innovation kind of organisations right now who are embracing science and technology. But even more so, it's harder to name females. So to me, it's a combination. We need more men to learn and to be really comfortable getting back and saying, you know, what is all this malarkey about automation and artificial intelligence and how do I use data? Like really getting into that sort of stuff. But at the same time, stopping women stopping themselves at a certain point of saying, how do we take them to the next level beyond I want to create a business, and creating a really wonderful business with 20 people to a really wonderful business with 200 people. And so those two things have got, for me, will both be successes for different reasons.
Do you think kids have outgrown education that is today?
Yes. Yeah, I think education as it stands right now is so broken. And I can't tell you, I mean, last week I was in a room full of people, all very, very senior people in education, and we all said it's never been so difficult to solve this problem, because absenteeism at its highest, achievements at its lack of achievements at its highest, participation, meaningful participation is low. We've got people who are bypassing the system, more people teaching their kids at home because they don't want to put them into the system. The system is also got a changing type of student. We've got more neurodiverse kids, we've got more immigrant families, we've got more kind of multi-Pacific and youth and language and bilingual, and so we've got lots of changes that are going on, and the system looks identical to what it did 20 years ago.
So what is being done about it? Because I look at my 16-year-old son, and you're just talking about males, 30-year-olds not wanting to learn, Zach is a smart kid, but you can just tell he's bored.
And probably one day a week really decides not to go to school.
He would love to not go to school. He goes with it because he loves his mates, and he has fun at school. But you can tell he's just not being challenged.
Yeah. And look, I think this is the division between kids who go, I can learn that really quickly just by Googling when I need to. And if everything else, can we do stuff that you can contextualise it in the world I know. So, yeah, I understand I need numeracy and literacy. I understand I need computer and technology and technical literacy. But contextualise it for me, so I'm not just talking about things in a theory that I don't understand, because I know that I'm never going to do that in real life. So don't teach me all the formulas of maths when I'm never ever going to do that, because I'll use a technology that does it for me. And so you've got that challenge, but I think you've also got this challenge of COVID said to a lot of students who actually are self-motivated and said, I can do a lot of this learning in 2 or 3 hours a day, and I could be on my gaming console for the rest of the day and still stay on top. Now, maybe they didn't learn all the things they needed, but it gave them this view of, why do we go to school between all these hours when actually some of it doesn't feel relevant? And so the job of a school, and unfortunately, the job of the education system is going to be, how do you bring context and relevance back? Because we need kids at school. We desperately need it to be a place where they develop social skills and independence, and we need them to be able to think and problem solve. We need them to be, those resilient kids we want them to be, and we can't do that if they're at home. But at the same time, if you keep the system and it doesn't move, it just says to them, you're not important enough for us to make changes. And when the pushback I get a lot from a ministry all the way through to teachers is, well, we can't afford for any cohort or group of students to be guinea pigs. And it's like, so that becomes the default. It's like, well, what if we try and it doesn't work? And then it's like, well, what if we try and it does?
Yes.
So I think what happens is, if you take almost every sort of industrial model in the world, they've all been disrupted by technology. And yet the school system, still operates as though we run these sort of 9 to 5 world that everybody turns up in the office at 9 and goes home at 5 and is afternoon tea at 3. It's really felt like the whole constraint has been based upon a system that's no longer there. And so I'm certainly working with a bunch of extraordinary smart Kiwis around this issue right now.
Brilliant.
We've been working on it for a long time. We had a call again this morning, and I'm still very hopeful we're going to have a solution. It's whether or not we can get the support we need to make it equitable so that everybody can access something that's alternative. what we don't want to do is have something that we create something that's only for a small elite. So that becomes the problem, because you can do anything you like if it's private. But the problem with private is you're not serving the issues that we need to solve across the entire sector. So we need a systems change, not just a sort of a small defining group change.
Hallelujah.
Wow.
Well, watch the space.
I'm excited. I'm really excited.
No promises, but we'll keep working.
So running towards end of time, and I'm just conscious about that. But I need to ask about the book, Future You, and I want to kind of get an understanding of how did it come about, and what do you hope people get from the book?
So I was contacted in January, must be 2 years ago. It was COVID time, and HarperCollins contacted me and said, would you write a book? Basically a sort of a biography, sort of a business book, sort of a help book, take your flavour. And I said, basically, thank you very much, but no, and left it at that. And of course, they were slightly persistent and sort of came back and said, do you realise that almost no women write these types of books while they're actually in the workforce? They write sort of memoirs,
postscripts, or
so it's sort of back on my life and things, and I really was challenged by that. I was thinking, gosh, I'm sure I've read lots of books like that. I've read Michelle Obama, and I've read and then I started looking and thinking, gosh, actually within the New Zealand context there's very, very few, and if they are corporate women, which has never been my world. I don't know what it's like to be a corporate woman. And so I suddenly realised that given we were in COVID times, my weekends were pretty much free because I wasn't travelling. We didn't know at any point in time whether we obviously friends and family. So it was sort of like, okay, maybe this is the time.
To do it.
And so the conversation took place in January, and she said, we would need your first draft of 75,000 words by August. And I was like, okay, 8 months, blah, 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 that sounds pretty good. And I was turning 50 in August, so I was like, okay, I can do this. I can get it done by my 50th. And she said, no, I meant August the following year, which is actually this year. Yeah, this year. And I was like, oh no, I can't do it for that long. That's way too long.
Got to have a more closer deadline.
I need a hard
Otherwise
deadline.
I'll just be
and I am literally a hard deadline person. And then I was like, okay, as soon as I agreed that I would give it a go, I told pretty much everybody I knew, saying, I'm going to write a book, and you're going to make sure every single time that you see me, and how am I progressing on my book? Because I know it's going to be easy just to sit, every time I hit a time when I'm having to write things about myself, I'm going to be like, no, I can't write this. And true to course, I actually I got into a real rhythm, and so it was a weekend project. So Saturday and Sunday, I start every morning on Saturday, and I'd write until I literally couldn't write anymore. So sometimes it was 2 hours, and sometimes it was 10 hours, and I did the same on Sundays, and I did that for 8 months.
Wow.
And so it became a bit of a labour of love.
Did you love it though?
I loved most of it. I think the first time I gave them the first draft, and I was like, yeah, I've done it, I managed to get it, and they came back and had removed like 20,000 words and said, no, that didn't quite work, so you need to kind of write again. And then I was like, I don't love you so much anymore.
Exactly.
But look, I wrote it not with any expectation, and with a huge amount of nervousness about how it would be received, because it's putting yourself out there. And even though it's not a personal biography by any stretch, it does have personal context, so that people can understand why I think various things and why I've done certain things. But what I was really hoping is to show people that there are many different types of lives. Mine has one particular flavour. People I've met along the way have different lives. People who I work with or associate with or have businesses with have different lives again. I want to make sure that we don't have this idea there's one life, and one new life you have to stay with. There's many different, and you can change as many times as you like. You can change direction, and if you want to leave your corporate job and go and live off the land and actually take a big break out, or away from all the stress, that's a complete good life. That we can step off the conveyor belt any time, and we can step back on if we want to. And so it was really trying to get that context of how do I share that without feeling like it's a mushy kind of biography, but also has some valuable points in it. And while I would probably, in fact, I've never read it again from the time I handed it over, but I did listen to the audiobook recently, which was really interesting. So the audiobook only came out about 3 weeks ago, and it's been voiced by an Australian actress.
I was going to say, who voiced it? Did you?
Actually, a wonderful woman, her name is Fiona McLeod. She's quite a well-known Australian actress. And it's quite weird because I sort of go, oh, it's not me, it's not my story, it's this Australian voice.
Yeah.
But when I was listening to it, there were parts I was like going, oh, that was quite clever. And parts of going, oh, why did I say that? So I don't know if I'll ever sit totally comfortably with it because I'm not an author. I love writing. And there's bits where I think, okay, I'm not sure that was very useful for anyone, so hopefully they just skip that part. And other parts I'm like, oh, that was actually quite clever. Yeah. But if anyone has a chance to write a book, I'd say do it, because if nothing else, it's been a huge kind of interest to my family, my kids, because a lot of stuff happened before they were born, or they happened while they were born. They had no idea what's going on because they were at a stage. So I think there is an element of capturing a moment in time that's actually quite useful, and I probably won't do it again.
What an incredible achievement, though. That's amazing.
Yeah. Well, I thought when they said there's enough demand to get an audiobook that's going through the American market, I was like,
hang on.
I was going to say that because they don't do that with
they
only do that when they know
there has to be enough sales and
exactly.
Things. So and it has had global release, which is kind of nice, but it's certainly not why I did it. Yeah.
Congratulations. It's awesome.
So many other questions we could ask if we wanted to take a lot more time, but the one we always like to finish with is, who is one person that you'd like to thank, someone that's been influential in your journey?
I think, while there are many, and I'm sure everyone has this, and for me it's definitely a family member, and that's my grandmother. And a couple of things in my life. She was a great one to tell. No, not to tell, but to show you how to get a life lesson. She was the one when she found me nicking a cigarette out of her handbag to get me sat down and made me smoke a packet all at once until I was violently ill and never smoked again. She was also the one...
Gold, absolute gold.
She was also the one that gave me my first sherry and sat down with a sherry and kind of like talked about life. But in one time actually, she had gone down to the local shops of a very, very small town in Taranaki where she lived. She went down to the shops, to the library. And she came back, and I don't know even how old she was at the time, but for me she was my grandmother. She was old, but she probably, blue rinse and elastic pants. But she was all rosy and really almost, you could almost see excitement. And I was like, oh, what's going on? And she said, oh, my heart's all aflutter. And she said, I just saw an old flame. And I suddenly realised that even in her, she had the most loving relationship with my grandfather, but even in her old age, she had this sense of connection to someone she dated, probably as a teenager, that she bumped into them and her heart was aflutter. And then she said to me just after, she said, life is much shorter than you think. Don't let a single day be wasted. And she did pass away quite early, unfortunately, of emphysema and smoking. So she, the smoke that she had did get her. But I think someone like that at a young age, where you feel like you're invincible forever, and the you who's 14 looking at your grandmother who, say they're in their late 60s or 70s, that period feels like I can't, it's like between dinosaurs and today. It feels like it's forever and ever and ever, and you're never ever going to be there. I think at that moment I realised that life truly is a nanosecond, that we're here as a blink on this planet, and actually, just by the way she did these things and gave me these great life lessons, she really instilled in me this idea that don't waste time. Just get out and live, get out and try things, experiment, and never ever take a day for granted.
Wow.
What a great lady.
She certainly was.
Yeah.
Well, what a great way to finish. Thank you so much, Frances, for sharing your thoughts, your perspectives, a bit about your journey, and I'm sure that there'll be people listening to this that the penny will drop on a number of different things, or you will have made people stop and think about that. So thank you for taking the time
welcome.
to
be
be
a roller
here with
coaster.
us. Yeah.
I can't believe an hour's gone.
I know.
Just
I know.
really can't.
Like
That's
over an hour. And I didn't know where to stop. I'm like, oh my God, I didn't get to ask that one. And can I just say, for those of you who are used to hearing another voice with Mel and I on A Seat at the Table, we missed you, Briar, and Briar's not with us because, unfortunately, COVID did get her. But she will be so excited to hear this because I know how much she wanted to be here. So,
hey, Briar.
Thank you.